My name's Tom Froggatt, and I'm on a mission to meet as many of the world's best CEOs as I can. I want to understand what makes them tick, what great leadership looks like from their perspective, and how they learn to be great at what they do. This started out as a solo quest, but quickly I realized I should share these conversations with the world. If you're a CEO right now who wants to be more effective in your work, or if you have aspirations to take the top job, then CEO Sessions is the right place to be. Come and join me as I unlock the secrets of the world's best CEOs. This time around on CEO Sessions, I'm with veteran CEO Tom Weaver. Tom and I talked about his candid insights on leadership, the importance of building the right team, and creating a supportive environment for growth. He really believes in hiring people smarter than you, managing board relationships well, and the need for passion and enjoyment in your work. Come join us to learn more. Tom, welcome to the show.
Hey, Tom, thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
Really good to see you. So, Tom, we always start with a really big question, and I'm very interested in your thoughts on this because as an experienced CEO yourself, but also sitting on and chairing several boards, you'll have, I guess, a few different perspectives on this. In your opinion, what is really the role of a CEO? What is that job really about?
Well, that's a pretty open question, very important question. I just have to predicate because I'm obviously American and have very strong opinions about things. I'm also, even worse, I'm from the Midwest, so we're very loud with our opinions. So, but my views are very much my own, and there's no secret recipe for how to be a CEO or to be a successful CEO. And everybody is different. They'll all have their own journey and go in different ways. And for me, it's really been through experience. I remember when I was a scientist, I got headhunted as a scientist, and actually, it's Bianca Coulter. So I'm sure many people are listening. They'll have worked with her. It's one of the biggest now recruiting agents in the country. But I remember when she was just starting out, and I was being recruited for some job, and she asked me that question. She said, "Tom, do you consider yourself a CEO?" And I was a card-carrying lab scientist, head of R&D kind of guy, tech dev, and I was just like, "No, wow, well, I never thought about that." At the end of the day, that's sort of where I've gone and my journey. And so for me, it was really, I suppose, to be opportunistic, and it needs to be done. So someone's got to step in there and do it to make stuff happen. So for me, what makes a CEO or makes them successful is really around leadership.
Yes.
That's an obvious answer, especially if you've been in the Boy Scouts. It's like, what does it mean to be a leader? But it's true. You really are the leader in your organization. But there are many different ways to be a leader. You can be an authoritarian, my way or the highway. And I have seen people like that. And I won't mention any names, but that just is not the way to be successful, I don't think. And I've seen people yelling and losing their temper and all that sort of stuff. You can be a leader without being that out of control. But you need to be the person, the buck stops here. You make the decisions and you handle the pressure. So I often think of a successful CEO as almost like a football manager, like Jose Mourinho. Now, I can't believe I'm saying that. I'm a Liverpool fan and all that. But what he was the greatest at was sort of deflecting pressure after games away from his team onto himself, which was brilliant. Sort of protect your team, kick their ass when they're in the locker room or whatever. But, and be honest, et cetera, then, but, really to handle that pressure and to make decisions. Okay. The other thing is really, obviously, again, for me, it's really building that team. You are the leader, but you're not going to be able to do it yourself. In fact, my message is, always work with people smarter than you. If you think you know what you're doing, somebody else will put you in your place. They don't know what they're doing. But you really need to build the team. And I've found in my experience that you should always start with the best. Always start with the tops. I've worked with people like Alan Bradley, who, said we're totally aligned on this. When you're going to go out there and hire, don't just try and find somebody who can fit into your budget or isn't right. Wait, take your time and find the people. And I'd say when you're setting your company up early, it's really important. And maybe other founders, you really want to work with the best people and people you can get along with, and look for the evidence and avoid avoid, I remember someone telling me this once, PIPs, previously important people.
Okay.
Say like, I'm old now, so probably the reason I'm on your thing is because maybe I've done stuff in the past previously important. You shouldn't look at that at all. You should really look at what you're doing now, what you've been doing most recently. So I think, avoiding those kind of people and really finding, the best people that are going to take your vision forward.
Yeah, interesting.
But then once you've built that team, you have to be in listening mode, and respond to your team. And you might even go, I'm not recommending this, but you go on these sort of psychological testing and know yourself type courses. And I remember I've been on those sorts of things, and they're quite helpful, and if anything, just showing how people are different behaviorally, socially, and all that sort of thing. And everyone's different, and in particular, especially in science, you're often surrounded by people that really, I have to ask every question. I have to ask it first. I have to be the loudest, and all the, kind of being a Donald Trump in your organization. I'm right. I'm the smartest guy in the room. When really what you need to do is give everybody a chance to talk, but listen for the quiet ones. And my last company, there was an individual that had super quiet, sort of shy personality, but always came up with the goods. And, I was almost at the end of every conversation, like, oh, hey, what do you think about this? And then, like Columbo asking that killer question at the end of an interview, really coming up with it. Also, I think, and again, probably showing my background, you got to be believable and transparent in what you're doing, because your team, teams are not going to follow a leader who isn't like that. So real leadership is, the quality of your team and how you're following them. And that's actually evidence when you go and set another company up. People come, I've certainly had people come up to me and say, "Oh, Tom, what's your next venture?" Like, if you're thinking about something, and this happens all the time. That's how ecosystems, Andy Richards is always talking about the ecosystem around Cambridge and what builds that. And that's because you see those kind of leaders that people are coming in and wanting to work with them again. So you can kind of get first, second, third generations sort of going through. But then I think, the last thing for me is really you have to have fun. You have to enjoy what you do. Seriously, I know it's probably the first thing, to be honest. At my age, it's certainly true. You got to have fun, because otherwise, why are you doing it? If you're not enjoying it, find something else that will bring you in enjoyment. And this again will rub off on your team, because if you're enthusiastic, you're the cheerleader in chief, then I think that's that rubs off on people, and they respond really, really well to that.
I think that's a really important point. I'm interested in how you kind of remind yourself of that and bring that into the team, because it's very easy to make this stuff very serious, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it is. And and you can't, just don't take yourself that serious, and take time, think about it. I'm terrible at this, actually, making kind of rash decisions, but I'm also a believer of your gut instinct. If your first sort of response to something is usually correct. So if somebody's a bullshit artist, you can kind of tell that straight away. It's like, nah, they're always going to be that way. But another thing I think that's really important, for a CEO, is you have to manage your board. And that's another discussion topic, but your board is the company's going to live and die, in my opinion, around the board and the board dynamics. And the good CEO will kind of upwardly manage that. I'm not sure what the word is, but making sure that you have a effective, constructive board where they're not micromanaging you, they're not telling you what to do, but they're advising you. They're supporting you. And the role actually with the chairman is so important. That's certainly a life lesson for me through various different companies. Having a good chairman that you can be, really not only friends with, of course, it has to be a serious relationship where they call you into question and stuff like that, but you have to respect each other and enjoy each other's company, and and be honest and transparent with them. So just as an example, in my last company, there's this guy, Fabian Kausch, who's just just an outstanding individual who I'd never met before setting up the company. It's a nice little story. So it was in animal health. So my background is in human health, but we were setting up my business partner, Alan Bradley, who I'm sure everybody will know on your podcast or whatever, genome engineer, entrepreneur extraordinaire in Cambridge. Set up many really successful companies, but we were doing what I call ChIMAb for dogs. So it was basically genome engineering of mice to make antibodies, but instead of making it for human applications, it was for like dogs and cats.
Yeah.
And so in terms of the science, I was all over that. I totally understood it, but the sector was in animal health, which I didn't understand, and Alan didn't understand. And it was very important to get to grips with this different sector. And so what I did was went to usually what you do is you go to meetings and you see who are the key opinion leaders and separate those pips out, right? But somebody who's really the really important people that are there, the influencers, key opinion leaders, all that. There was this guy, George Gunn, who was clearly the made guy when we set that up. He was everywhere. He was at every meeting, keynote speaker and all that. Super nice guy, Scott, vet, hugely successful in pharmaceutical industry, ran R&D at Novartis, knew animal health. And so I approached him. I said, George, would you be our chairman? And I came really close to getting him. It's like everybody, of course, wanted him in their companies.
Yeah, of course.
But I got to know him. I remember him coming over to Cambridge, and he lived in Oxford, and he came over to Cambridge to visit. We were on the Hinkston site, and because it was really out of Alan's lab. And I remember talking to George. He goes, Tom, I really want to. I'm trying to retire, but I keep getting clawed back into this. But I got all this stuff going on. But I know a guy. And he knew Fabian, who he had hired at least twice, I think, in his career, who was just stepping down. He was EVP of R&D for a very large animal health company called Boehringer Ingelheim, and previously been with Marielle. And so George is like, I know he's thinking of the next stage in his journey, and he's a big corporate guy, but he doesn't really do biotech. But I think he'd be perfect. So he put us in contact, and it turned out, I think, like the next month or whatever, Fabian was coming over to Jeffrey's conferences. I don't know. We went out for lunch in London, and we hit it up. It was a gut thing. It's like, right. Of course, I couldn't just say, yeah, you're chair. I had to go back to the board and sell it to the board. But it was like, this is the guy. We do not need to go through headhunters. This person has all the attributes that you want for a chair, and I can work with them. And it was the smartest move. And he was super keen to join. He'd never done it before. It was hilarious. Now I think back, and he's like, well, I'm not sure. I've never done this. Well, the guy is so experienced and successful.
Yes.
Of course, he knocked it out of the park. But we really had a good time over the next 4.5 years with the company, and he provided me so much mentoring and understanding of the whole sector. And so for me, again, I consider myself a pretty successful CEO, but the only reason I was able to do that was because I had that support from Fabian, the chair role, which was the most important relationship. Of course, the rest of the investment directors and Alan on the board as well, as an executive director, was also really key. So I think we did the dynamics of that were super. We were always aligned. I'm so proud of this. We never had a vote.
Okay.
In 4.5 years, none of this, investment directors putting their hands on their, like this, crossed armed, tea sucking, and you guys, no, we always aligned around that. All kinds of stuff. Not that we didn't have different opinions on stuff, but pulling together that is absolute success. And if you can do that as a CEO, you're probably pretty lucky, but you're going to have a successful company. Absolutely.
And I suppose on that point, I guess there's going to be two categories of people that are on your board, aren't there? There's going to be the people that you bring in for their expertise, like Fabian, who you've talked about, or maybe you bring in someone who's a finance expert or whatever it might be. And then there's going to be the investors that also sit on the board. And of course, every investor is going to tell you that they're not going to micromanage the company. And
exactly.
Really, they're going to trust you to get on with it and that kind of thing. I suppose it's more likely from that group that you're going to get more interference than the advisory people that you bring in. You obviously built a very harmonious board, and as you said, there's an element of luck in that. But were there any things that you've sort of identified as kind of signals that this is probably the right person to bring in as an investor, or any telltale signs that you could share around that? Because I think it's really difficult to.
Yeah. Well, oh my God. I mean, that's a question for over beer. There's so many ways of looking at it, and it is so important. It is really important.
Yeah.
And to be honest, just being very honest, beggars can't be choosy. If you're
Well,
looking for
true. Yeah.
cash and you need cash, and those are the investors, those are the people you're gonna have to work with. Now, of course, other folks are gonna tell you, oh man, I was oversubscribed and I had 20 investors, 3 term sheets, whatever. It's like, okay, then great, then you can be more selective, but that's pretty rare, to be honest.
Yeah.
So what it's while you're developing that syndicate and finding those leads and stuff, if you can use your radar to find the right ones. So a really good example, again, with PetMedics was getting corporate on. So,
Right.
do I bring a corporate investor in? Do I don't? And there's pluses and minuses. I don't want to be unduly influenced, conflicts of interest. Oh, you're in bed with them, they're going to buy you, no one else is going to be interested, all that kind of stuff. We actually brought in corporate from Japan. They were called Kairitsu Sayaku. And obviously the Japanese market is very important. It's about 10% of the European market. So it's not huge, but it's the gateway to Europe. Hugely experienced market. They brought in some of the first animal health vaccines, distemper vaccine in like the 1950s. So they were like the largest animal health corporate in Japan, and they were super keen on our technology. They didn't have a corporate venture fund, but they just wanted to get close to us and learn from us. And so we brought them on, and it was the best move we ever made, because the individuals that were on the board were really engaged, and they really helped me, like Fabian, understand the animal health market, like the difference between dogs and cats. I remember a chap named Kondo, who was a vet. He was actually one of the leading equine vets in Japan. When the Tokyo Olympics, he was the guy there doing all the drug testing for the equestrian. He sent me pictures from his phone when I think we won a gold and Britain won a gold and something. Anyway, you remember him telling me, Tom, a cat is not a small dog. It's like, you can't just, your science, you have to think more than just the science and molecular genetics. You really do have to think about the physiology and also the market and all that. But super engaged, really interested in the technology, helped in so many ways. I had many, many really, really productive conversations. And actually, I miss working with these guys, actually. Because we sold the company last year. But yeah, so selecting those sorts of really engaging board members is really important. One thing we didn't do, which I think is quite important, is to get somebody in with maybe more commercial experience. This is, I think, for a lot of your, the people that are on this program, a lot are in these early stage companies where they're way pre-commercial. They haven't really thought, other than, from a pitch deck of what the market size is and all that, but, really somebody who's been there and done that, who understands the customer and all that. That would be useful at the board level. We never had that. You don't see that often in boards at such an early stage. But I find that quite useful. Maybe you can get that through advisors. And we had decent advisors outside. But there's just something about boards, you're sort of like a family, and you're really open about everything and trying to identify and prioritize the big issues, and that go-to-market strategy, and who do you partner with, and how do you make yourself attractive for a trade sale. Those are quite useful. I think in terms of advisors, another one of my points is to obviously to use those advisors, but start talking to your bankers early, because they're helping you with that, because they, a lot of these guys are very specialist in selling your company or doing big deals. They really understand the landscape and can give you really, really good advice in terms of what are the value inflections of your company, what do you how far do you have to get before you'll reach certain trigger of a valuation, who's likely to be interested in buying with you, and of course their network, they can introduce you to people. So it's quite helpful.
Yeah, and I guess you never know when things are going to align, right? So you never know when there's going to be a strategic gap in someone's company that you could
Mm.
fill, or like, you know,
Yep.
it's not necessarily going to be at the point that you go, right now we want to sell the company. It's, you know, being out in the market is important too,
Well, I
right?
would say you got to start the dance. It's never
Yeah.
too early to start the dance. It's never too early for lots of things. We brought in a chief product development officer too our first year, and again the board was like, "Well, why do we need that? We're just in platform validation, and
Mm.
you don't have a candidate, a lead candidate selected yet. So why about it?" Well, actually, because that individual has so much knowledge, even in the R&D stage, about what your product's got to look like, what the profile of the drug should look like, and sort of been there and done that and avoid those costly mistakes that you got to try and fix
Yeah.
later on. So again, really, really good idea. Same with IP, bringing an IP expert in. God, if I was starting again, uh, if I was doing my degree over again, I'd either do, more math. I was a math undergraduate, but I'd probably do
Hmm.
more math as a postdoc or whatever, get into more computing and stuff, or I'd go into IP law because
Yeah.
there's just not enough of them, and you could write your ticket. There's every new biotech that's coming up, setting up, to bring in house somebody with that expertise is so invaluable.
Yes.
You know,
And I guess on that point, and also sort of referring back to something you said earlier, you mentioned, you know, in terms of people and in terms of bringing people in, bring in the very best people and
hmm
worry less about your budget and more about the caliber of the person.
hmm
Obviously, people are going to be probably the most expensive part of your company, and that can be a really difficult decision to make, especially early on, can't it? Where money is tight and resources are finite, going and spending a lot of money on someone
mm
can be really difficult. But you sort of alluded to the fact that that's a better way. It's a better way to go. You know, overspend if you need to, but
yeah, yeah,
bring
yeah,
in the right people.
yeah. I mean, and then you go the difference between the U.S. and the UK. I mean, let's
Yeah,
get real. Trying to bring some, chief scientist or chief CPDO from the States and in the UK, you're just not going to be able to afford them. Certainly with
yeah,
the ecosystem we're in. So you have to be realistic. But and don't get me wrong, it doesn't have to be that you've got somebody with all this amazing
mm,
experience you're trying to bring in. It's maybe that's again something you get with through experience and age. Being able to sort of judge, is this person going to be able to step up into the
right.
role? So yeah, I won't name names, but I know certain scientists that I know, if I was to set another company up, that's the person I want to
Right,
take.
yeah.
And they might be a junior level scientist, but they can go all the way. And it's like get them early,
Hmm.
and have the fun in that transition. And in fact, same sort of thing happened. When we were acquired. They're sort of keeping the lab going, and it's sort of a business unit here in Cambridge. And my recommendation was very much pick sort of, because this is classic. When you get bought by a large pharmaceutical company, they usually cut the necks off all the senior people, which is
Yeah,
what happened.
yeah.
I'm an MRC director, Alan's an FRS, we're gone, right? So they're going for, we want to call the shots. We don't want any backstreet drivers. We're going to run typical from the United States. We know what we're doing in the US. It's like, okay, it's a different culture here, different ecosystem, whatever. Why don't you pick somebody who is just absolutely been trained, almost apprenticed to step into that role? Why not let them do that? Why
Mm,
not let them step up? And I think that's isn't necessarily what's happened. I don't know. I haven't been in the company for
sure.
since April, but it isn't like they were like, oh yeah, let's really go for it. It's like, oh no, we're gonna fly somebody in from the States to do that. And it's like, oh my God, recipe for disaster. But
Yeah.
it's their company, they can do what they want. Rather than saying, oh, here's somebody who's really got that potential, let's back them and go for it. And I see that a lot in with
Yeah.
exits and all that sort of stuff. So that's a whole nother thing. How do you manage a good trade sale and really make the best out of it? But yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and that is a topic I'd love to get into, but I think that's probably a whole
That's a beer.
podcast in and of
That's a
itself.
that's
Yeah,
that's a beer. Yeah, we can talk about that over.
yeah, absolutely. No, it's interesting. It's sort of, as you say, it's the talent, not the CV, right? It's the person, not necessarily that, like you say, their background. Are they this pip that you've brought on board, and also, I guess if you're going to do something that's exactly a cookie cutter of something that's been done before, fine, bring in the person who's done it before. But that's probably not going to be the case, right? There's probably going to be different twists and turns, and you're going
Yep.
to have to figure them out together. And so,
Not in our sector, that's for sure. If you do a cookie cutter and do what somebody, you're done.
yeah,
Your
yeah,
technology is already obsolete. Why?
yeah,
That's the question. Why are you doing that? You need to be doing the next, N+3 or whatever. You need to be thinking way ahead of what's currently being done.
yeah, absolutely. And then for you, Tom, in your journey as a CEO, and I kind of say that in the knowledge that it's your development journey is never finished as a CEO, right? You're
Mhm.
always trying to get better, and you're always trying to learn different ways of doing things and new situations and new scenarios. For you, and you might have mentioned some of these, what have been the most important lessons that you've learned, do you think? Which probably are the hardest lessons, but the most impactful ones for you, do you
Oh
think?
my gosh, yeah. Oh, yeah, and I probably have touched on. I'm sort of going all over the shop.
Mm,
Um, Yeah, well, I think I mentioned it. Work with people that are smarter than you.
yeah.
It's so important, and it comes back to that joy, right? You want to have joy in your life. You want to and inspire that in your team. So if you're working with somebody who's smarter than you are, you're learning.
Yes.
Every day you're going in and you're learning from that individual or those individuals. So I think that my life lesson is do not pick on somebody because they're smarter than you. Oh, I don't want to hire them because they'll put me in the shadow.
Yeah.
I won't be the CEO. They'll outperform me as CBO or whatever. No, just the opposite. So you find those individuals really who complement what you're doing, complement the
Mm,
team. I mean, it sounds blindingly obvious, but and it's been my pleasure. I mean, I've worked with people I swear should get the Nobel Prize. And to me that is Midwesterner coming to Cambridge, England, the home of Nobels and so many fields, starting so many fields. It's just like an honor. It's like, wow, I've just talked to someone who is seriously smart.
yeah.
There's this guy. I was another company I set up called Congenica, which was based on human genome sequencing.
Hmm.
One of the founders is Richard Durbin, who's a friend of mine, who's definitely not a pip. He's like everything he's ever done in his life, ever since he was like a graduate student, has turned into some major discovery or
Right.
program, textbook, all that sort of stuff. And I just so many times I'm talking to him and I think he's thinking about something else. We're having a very important conversation, but he's probably thinking about something in parallel to what we're
Yes.
talking about. He might be solving he's a math guy, he might be, working on something. And so, you can just see the kind of, the
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
machinations going on, but it's so cool. It's like, God, I wonder what that is, so yeah, and it was such a pleasure just working with, and other individuals as well. He wasn't the only
Hmm.
smart person there. But, I was like, the dummy in the room, and I'm not dumb, but it was amazing. So yeah. Um, and I guess, yeah, the other thing, well, I guess there's three is right, working with people smarter than you and that getting the right team. It's all about that. The other thing is obviously the market,
Mm,
finding that gap in the market. There's too many Me Too's out there. So I think it's a
yes.
follow on from what you were just saying, like, oh, you kick cookie cutter or whatever. So really you want, you know, to be defining the next solution where there's a gap in the market. And
Yes.
there was this guy, I can't remember his name. He was the Carville, James Carville. He was campaign advisor for Bill Clinton, and he
Okay.
was the guy who came up with two things. One which everyone remembers. It's the economy, stupid,
Right.
right? So to me, it's the science, stupid, right? So it really is. And I've heard lots of people say, "Oh no, good science isn't enough. Good science
Mm,
isn't good business. Is bullshit." It has to start with the science. It really
yes.
does in our sector. It really does. So it's it's the science, stupid. And then he also said, change versus more of the same. And that's what we're going to hear actually with Kamala Harris. I won't go down into the politics, the American election. Date your podcast here. God knows I'll probably be proven wrong, but I do believe that the change is important. So really focusing on that market
Right.
and what your technology is doing to change what's happening right now. So with everything I've done, it's always one of the first of its kind to do genome analysis to actually
Yes.
diagnose kids. pets with monoclonal antibody, rituximab for lymphoma in a dog. These things have never been done before. And clearly, the other thing is, another lesson is that the product is king. And for those people who know me, they've probably heard me say this a million times, which is funny because I have worked on platform companies and, software companies, stuff like that. But, and there's nothing wrong, obviously, with a service company or whatever. But at the end of the day, product is king. It's what really brings the value, certainly in a trade sale. That's the easiest thing to put a cash value on. Now, of course, you have to have a good platform to make that product. So, and what the sort of playbook we all work to in biotech is you have a kick-ass, novel, highly protected bit of intellectual property around the platform no one else has, your special sauce, but it's kicking out those products. And the important thing is to get to those products quickly, and to do that because you can validate the platform, but then you have products which are going to be valuable. And that's also then where partnering comes in. So the importance of partnering, where they see the value of that platform to develop products that they want. Then you enter that partnership so that you can get some non-dilutive working capital to kind of advance what's going on and bootstrap on what you've already done, but bring some more people in or whatever, validate that platform, crank out a couple of products that these guys are going to want. They're your proper commercial route to the market, your commercialization partner if it's a big pharma company. And then of course they're a likely trade sale partner. So that's a really important lesson. Another thing, for me, it's information. And obviously, you've probably had this a lot on your podcast, people getting into AI and all that. It isn't necessarily the AI bit, but it's just that the information I found in multiple different companies, it's the information which is really sort of the underpinning structure of which you're building your company. It's really the value. I mean, I just said, products of value. That's the products. But to get to that product, you need the data. You need to exploit the data. So, but it's what you do with that data that's so important. So, a good example, I was involved in a company called Hexagen, which was probably arguably the first genetics company in the UK. It was a genomics company. It was a spin out from the genetics department. Peter Goodfellow, absolute genius, head of department, sort of set this company up as he left before moving into the pharmaceutical sector. And our ambition was to do mouse genetics to identify drug targets using genetic manipulations and screening and stuff that could then be used to model human health and develop better validated drug targets in humans, then develop the drugs. And so we came up with some really good technology, and we actually, part of what we were doing, we developed a database which was based on all of our mouse work, and it was very comparative to human work. So we'd look at the mouse orthologs of the human and identify, the sort of humanized mutations in mice and all that. But it became very clear that our business model, which to be honest, another life lesson is, be prepared to pivot. So our business model was to do all this in mice and then flog it to a pharma company. They did not want mice models. They wanted human data. So our leadership sort of made the very important and bold decision after about a year into the company to switch to human genetics rather than mouse genetics. And that was the smartest thing we did, because then that allowed us to exploit a lot of the experimental medicine that was happening at the time and work with companies, sort of emerging tech companies, genomic companies that were generating lots of this sort of sequence information, and they loved us. So we had a natural partnership around that data. And of course, they bought us for that ability to mine the data. So we were bought by a company called Insight to kind of expand that database and annotate that database. The concept of annotation actually came from Richard Durbin, the whole idea of annotating mutations onto a sequence and, looking at genome structure and potential function, but using the computer and all that. So we were doing that that was in the mid to late 1990s. But that information was so important, but it allowed important discoveries around mechanism and target space. And what was interesting is then Insight did another pivot from taking that information, and then they made themselves from a sort of information company, software company, et cetera, into a drug company. So
Right.
then they used that information to transition into becoming a fully fledged pharmaceutical company, which they're still around today. 20 years
Yes.
later, 25 years later, I don't know, $30 billion market cap human pharma company. But my point there is that you start off with these sort of models and data and all that. The most important thing was then getting that information and using that information to develop products. And pretty much every company has that. From my experience, that certainly was true with Pemetics. Yeah, and yeah, there's probably lots of lessons out there. Like I did mention, use advisors, super important, especially if you're thinking of selling your company. I would go out for a formal trade sale process. That's something I've learned. You probably get a better deal going and using people who really know what they're doing and help start not an auction, but because it's a tough one, because a lot of investors say, well, you can't go out there and say you want to be sold, because then the price goes down. Because they're like, oh, they need it. What's wrong? Why do you need to get sold? But if you are going to go through a trade sale process, bring the experts in who can take a lot of the load also off your hands. That's why getting to know bankers early on. So I love going to the city, although it's changing. You don't go to Liverpool Street anymore. You go into nicer parts of London to meet these folks. But they're sort of courting you to what's up, and how you can help, how they can help you with growing your business to that next exit, and they can work with you on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's kind of, I guess if you map that out, everything starts with the science, the technology, the quality of the insight, I suppose, the quality of the fundamental concept of the business.
Yep.
You've got to establish then what is the thing that's going to do that will change things. How are you going to affect change in the market, in the world, in the industry, whatever it might be. Understand your customers, understand what they want and what they need, and how so and I suppose that's what people often mean when the science is not enough, is that the science has got to be great, but you've got to then figure out, how do you apply it, what are you gonna do with it.
Let's do a concrete example. I haven't really talked about Congenica, which I'm really proud of. I think it's an awesome company, still private. It's sort of one thing you talk about Congenica is timing. So they were sort of the first in, and now there's a million guys kind of coming in doing the same thing. But at the time, really nobody was doing this. And it was essentially a spin out from the Sanger, the Genome Project, and something called the DDD, Deciphering Developmental Disorders, which was a really cool Department of Health and Wellcome Trust funded program to look at intellectual disability and identify potential genetic changes that were associated in causing the intellectual disability or other kinds of developmental delay, that sort of stuff. And it works. It's one of those things, in the field of human genetics, what we found, lots of different approaches, lots of different sort of genetic analysis. Some things work, some things don't work.
Right.
Yeah. So especially with chronic disease and, these risk factors, it's really complicated. Monogenetic, very much, disease associated with rare genetic diseases, metabolic disorders or whatever. It works. You can find that needle in the haystack using your genomics and your fancy math and filtering and all that. And so that's what the DDD sort of started out to do. And then we commercialized that and sort of scaled it up, really, so that the NHS could use it as part of the everyday diagnosis of patients. So my point there is the application is, theoretically, you could take a human genome and identify mutations and associate that with a disease, a diagnosis for a particular kind of rare genetic disease. We're actually able to do that. We were able to, productize that, make it into a pipeline, which should be very quick. I mean, we were able to do that in a matter of days. Of course, you're working in a large NHS. There's a lot of complications. Things can take a lot longer. But, theoretically, you can turn the crank on this technology really, really efficiently, and get a diagnosis for a patient, where previously, before the genome was done and before these molecular genetic analysis pipelines were developed, it would take years to get a diagnosis, and now you can get that to a matter of days or weeks. And I'm really proud to say, when we were able to crack that as a small company in the UK up against some pretty big corporates, and introduce it very successfully, certainly in the UK through the NHS, and it's really making a difference in patients' lives. I've been there. I've been to the hospitals in this country and other countries that are using this technology, and meeting the doctors. Not so much the patients, but usually the medical staff that are using this and doing it. And it means something to them. It's heartfelt. You are making a difference for their patients. And you got to remember that obviously the most important is the patient, but it's their family, it's their caregivers. They also are, really influenced by the ability to identify and diagnose the disease, and then of course treat it. So if you can't do that, it makes life really, really difficult. So it's amazing that, we were able to do that, and now it's becoming much more commonplace. And in fact, and I think chronic disease, infectious disease is going that way as well. And it should come to the point where, and I remember Richard and I talking about this almost 20 years ago, every baby born will have its genomes. You carry your genome with you your entire life, and that's part of your electronic health record. And it's the baseline of which so much of this will be predicated on in a very open and fair way for everybody. So it's not just rich people and private healthcare have this done. It should be done for everybody.
Yeah, for sure. And I think what you've articulated there really well is that you've got to be able to really emphatically answer the question, why does this company exist, right? Beyond intellectual curiosity and because we can. What's the reason for it? What's the purpose of it? Why is this company here?
And that's what helps you recruit people. I can tell you that right now. We're helping kids. Everybody at PetMedics owned a dog or a cat. They came there specifically because they love their animals. One Health and all that. It's super special. One thing I guess another life lesson is, when do you do the United States? The Congenica just made me think about it, because we burned a lot of cash trying to do the States, and you can do the States well, and you can do the States not so well. And the UK, we have a real issue in doing the States well. So I guess my life lesson there is, be very careful. If you, just because it's a big market and you throw a lot of money at it, doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be able to break into it. We have had success there, but not warranting, the huge amounts of expenditure that you're going to do. So, if you're going to do the States, you have to be very, judicial in how you're going to do it. I would say partner with somebody who's already there and doing it. And that was sort of, what we did with PetMedics. So we were acquired by Zoetis, which was from Kalamazoo, Michigan, which I'd actually heard of. Most people, when I said, we're going to get bought by this company from Kalamazoo, like, where is that? What is that? It's like, well, actually, it's in the Midwest. But, fantastic, big American company. They know how to commercialize. They know how to reach the customers. So, so if you're going to do the States, you have to think seriously about how to do that. So, and I don't have the answers for it, that's for sure. Still don't.
No, it's a really good point. And look, Tom, there's a bunch of stuff that I could ask more about. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but it's been fantastic to talk to you. Thank you so much for taking part.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks a lot, Tom.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of CEO Sessions. If you got a kick out of it, share it with someone else who you think will enjoy it. And hit like and subscribe so you can get the newest ones when they come out. And if you want to see more of me, you can find me on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, or YouTube, or especially LinkedIn. See you soon.